Aloha! Welcome to my channel. Welcome back for return viewers and subscribers. Thanks so much for checking out the video for this week. So just kind of hopping right into it. Excuse me. So wow, like we are, for those that don't pay too much attention to certain astrological cycles, we're in what's called a Mercury Retrograde cycle right now, and whew, I don't know about you all, but I am feeling it. This is a particularly potent one, I feel like, for me, and I've already been hearing from some other people all kinds of stuff going on since the starting of this retrograde, which started this last Sunday, I think was the first day of the retrograde. So just kind of throwing that out there. So anybody that's been having a particularly challenging week, especially if it's outside of the norm and you kind of can't quite put your finger on what's going on, too, during Mercury retrograde cycles, it seems to also affect electronics. So if anybody's experiencing wonkiness in electronics or technological systems, that's more than likely why. Two, one of and this was basically what I wanted to do this video on. One of the big things that seem to go along with Mercury retrograde cycles is there tends to be not always like a falling apart, although that can be a part of it, but the communication is usually challenged between people during a retrograde cycle. So literally meaning communication, like we could be saying things to each other that we would normally easily be able to understand and comprehend and get what the other person is saying. However, in a retrograde cycle, it seems to be nothing but brick walls sometimes in trying to communicate with somebody else. I just ate my lunch, and so I feel like I have something stuck in my teeth. So, communication. For me, this retrograde cycle seems to really be impacting communication, and so kind of took it as a cue of, ooh, maybe this would be a good thing to highlight and discuss, at least on my channel. There's tons of information out there on Mercury retrogrades and kind of more fuller forecasts to just basic like explanations of the cycle itself and what the trends tend to be as far as what gets affected. So it's kind of like, you don't have to be somebody that's actually into astrology or even believes in astrology. Mercury retrograde cycles do affect us, though, and it's a lot along the lines of like how solar flares and other certain celestial, universal, cosmic forces absolutely do affect us on our planet, because a lot of the times we're talking about magnetic interferences to other, or electromagnetic interferences to, on a magnetic level, all kinds of things being affected. So like even with full moon cycles, right? Like there's astrological. No, astrological. Sometimes I get my words confused. We're just gonna blame any of my glitches and whatnot. We're gonna go ahead and blame that on retrograde. So please forgive me from the get-go if I'm really struggling to find words. It's Mercury's fault. But yeah, so even things like a full moon, right? Like you don't have to get into like any of the astrological variables of full moon and what a full moon can mean, especially if you get into like this house, this sign, that sign, whatever. However, we do know full moons affect us, and a lot of it is because of gravity and a lot of things on this planet being water. And so, anyhow, getting off into a little bit of a tangent, I guess I was just more trying to explain that a Mercury retrograde cycle does in fact affect us in basic ways, like as far as affecting even the physics, similar to how a full moon affects us, to how solar flares, all that other cosmic stuff does affect us. And you don't even have to get into the actual science and art of astrology to get into really anything as far as like deeper meanings and whatnot. It's just a thing. Okay, so all of that aside, to come back to the point of this video is I just wanted to make a video, and now being the perfect time because we're in a retrograde, just to bring awareness to it. And why I think it's a good idea to, and I'm even getting to a place in my life where I feel like this is maybe almost a necessity, but wanting to just even mark on my calendar year of where the retrograde cycles are. And I can't even take credit for that idea. That was actually my husband's idea, because this retrograde cycle in particular, we've already been very challenged in the arena of communication. And so he came up with the idea of like, this seems to be a pattern, and whenever we're in a retrograde, we do seem to have a lot of butting heads in simple communication. And so it's kind of like, marking our calendars, we can at least have some knowing that a retrograde cycle is coming, so we can just kind of prepare ourselves. Not that, it's like, he was saying, as far as he was sharing that he's had this idea before but didn't bring it up because it's like another aspect of the human being is that we can also create self-fulfilling prophecies. And so it was, I guess, him not wanting to say anything as far as let's go ahead and implement this, because first, I guess, wanting to just keep observing us as a couple, as a unit, and to see if there was any pattern that kept showing up. Turns out it did. And so it's like, okay, well, maybe we could try this and then we'll just see what happens. And so I actually thought that was a brilliant idea. Eureka. And so I wanted to get on here and just even share that. I, for one, am coming to really see how powerful a retrograde cycle is. And so if I can, I or all the rest of us can see and know that it's coming, it's like we can perhaps better prepare ourselves mentally, emotionally, that, there might be some rough roads ahead. So let me kind of like gear up. As far as communication is concerned, let me really either try to, be as clear as possible, but even if it seems like you're being as clear as possible and things are still kind of falling through and getting fuzzy, which they tend to do in a retrograde cycle, Mercury retrograde, like maybe then just more actually sit back a little bit more than we normally would as far as interacting with people, our loved ones, especially significant others, but especially people that you do tend to, get in conflict maybe rather easily with, of course that's going to be like what to do is going to be something relative to each person, each case, each relationship. But nonetheless, just wanting to share that, that as basic and kind of like, yeah, duh, as it might seem to me, like meaning, yeah, duh, Sarah, like why didn't I think of that before? But then it was kind of like, oh, well, but you didn't. So if you didn't think of it, there's got to be other people out there that haven't considered that. And so that's really mostly what I'm wanting to do with this video, is just actually share that idea. Again, I cannot take any credit for it. That was my husband's. But two, I also wanted to highlight the communication part of, communication. Not just the communication part of going through a retrograde cycle, but just communication in general. That is the very vessel that we have as humans to connect with each other and to build a bridge of understanding between one another. And when communication starts falling apart or getting stunted, that's when relationships start falling apart, right? Well, so obviously on an individual scale, I kind of already hinted that I had. Sorry about that. Camera stopped recording. So communication. The one of the things that was coming back to me as far as full, not full circle, because I think I would have to explain the full circle in order for you guys to even get what I mean by full circle. But one of the things that was just reinforced to me, so again, I was kind of talking about, at least my personal experience with this retrograde cycle has been taking me back to some basics as far as communication. And one of the main things, I really hope all this is making sense. Again, I know I tend to be a little rambly, but we're in a retrograde cycle, so I feel like I might be slightly more rambly than normal. Okay, so the thing that is being reinforced to me with this retrograde cycle was that I tend to, and I know my husband was admitting, he tends to do the same thing, but I know it is not just the two of us. I think this is a thing that all of us humans do, and especially when it comes to close relationships, is that we tend to think that we already know everything that the other person is thinking, gonna think, gonna say, gonna do, how they're gonna act. I guess that's kind of the same thing. But it's like, I think in another video I was talking about, not making assumptions and jumping to assumptions. And, that is one of the biggest fallacies in communication, is jumping to an assumption. And yes, it might be true that sometimes we're jumping to an assumption based on some historical context or historical variables, and we could in fact be totally accurate with our assumption once the scenario actually plays itself out. But one thing I would like to invite all of us to keep in mind is that it is still an assumption, and it is critical when it comes to human relationships to not hold your assumption in such high regard that the assumption then becomes fact to you. We have to keep in mind our assumptions are just assumptions, and we could be onto something, we could potentially be right, but let reality play itself out. And so, my husband and I, had gone through some stuff, and then we're kind of, coming out on the other side, and, talking to each other. And it was both of us just realizing, like, man, like, we kind of did it again. We did this thing where we were assuming what each other was thinking, and implying, and assuming where the other person was coming from and what their intentions were. And, it's so harmful. Because you're not letting in the reality of where that person is coming from in that moment. And again, just going to the point of, you maybe are making an assumption because there's a lot of historical context there, and so you feel comfortable making that assumption. Still urge you, implore you to keep in mind it is still just an assumption. It's your best guess estimate. Your I don't even know what the other. I got so used to saying guesstimate. It's your best guess estimate. That's yeah, that's how it goes. And you may be right again. Highly likely, especially if you have a lot of historical context, but please don't do the logical fallacy of just assuming that you are in fact hands down correct just because there's historical context. Because too, what you're not allowing for in the moment is the opportunity for the other person to change. And so, it's just all kinds of ways that we can actually get in the way of our own success as far as building healthy relationships. And, just again, like, wow, communication, that is the biggest thing that can harm and hurt relationships. And from what I understand from, the experts in relationship counseling and coaching, that in fact that lack of communication is the number one thing that'll break down a relationship faster than anything. And I would even say a lot of infidelity could be happening because there's a lack of communication or a misinterpretation of what is trying to be communicated. And so I argue that communication may be the most important thing to get a hold of in any relationships, but especially in intimate relationships and with our significant others. And so in this retrograde cycle, I just wanted to first just introduce it to anybody that's a subscriber to my channel, especially if it's something you've never heard of. This is the first time you've ever come across this. To share what I feel like is my husband's brilliant idea of let's go ahead and mark them on the calendar so that way we can start preparing ourselves for when they come, because whether we like it or not, they affect us. Not always bad either. I don't want to give the impression that it's always like heavy duty for each person each and every time. Some retrograde cycles tend to affect like other sun signs differently. This particular one just seems to be hitting some people pretty hard and heavy. So I also wanted to mention it for this particular cycle because I think it's projected to be a pretty intense one. So I just wanted to inform from that angle. But I also wanted to add in some of my own personal experiences with this one, and then to highlight the communication part, because a retrograde cycle is usually a lot to do with communication. And so since this one seems to be hitting some of myself, my husband, other people that I know, some clients, figured, you know what, let me just kind of make a quick, I don't know if this is going to be that quick, but a quick video on Mercury retrograde, kind of get the info out there as far as the basics, but then kind of like warning flags. I think this one is going to be a little bit of a roller coaster if it hasn't been for you already. I hope for those that are having a rough week so far, that you're getting through it, that you're reaching on your social circle, your support system to vent if you need to vent. Crying included. Find crying to be a wonderful way to vent and release stuff. But too, just to maybe help make sense of things if it just seems like things are really out of whack, like way outside of the normal. And then too, just to kind of highlight that Mercury retrograde cycles do also seem to always affect electronics to some degree. So I just wanted to throw that out there too, that if you're having technical electronic issues, it's probably because we're in a retrograde cycle. Two, little side note, more that it comes from professionals in the field, like professional astrologers. They usually say to never start up any new projects or new contracts when you're in a retrograde cycle, because again, the main theme is communication, and that we have those technological glitches, and if people do start new things and new projects, new contracts, whatever, in a retrograde cycle, that a lot of the times those newly started projects can go awry really quickly. Camera stopped recording again. I guess it's telling me I need to wrap this up. So yeah, that I just wanted to finish what I was saying too about professionals usually recommend to not start anything new in a retrograde cycle, because things can usually get lost in translation. Technological things can get wonky and go awry. Things just can get lost. Even obviously like electronics, so even data to files, all that kind of stuff. So I hope all of that made sense. Apologize about the camera stopping a few times. I still haven't figured out why it does that. I feel like I've played with my camera settings as much as I can, and I can't quite figure out why it's doing that. But at least I'm hoping I'm doing a good enough job of picking up the pieces of where it cuts me off. And on that note, yeah, no, I think we're good. I just wanted to talk about Mercury retrograde. All right, well, hopefully I don't have any technical issues getting this edited and uploaded, but if I do, we're just going to blame it on Mercury. Why not? All right. Well, thanks again so much for swinging by, checking out my video, listening to me rant, and I will catch you all in next week's video. Aloha.